The Punisher just crossed a line that even longtime Marvel fans never expected him to reach, and the terrifying part is that he did it with absolutely nothing left to lose. The special presentation opens like a ghost story hiding inside a war film, and from the very first scene I could feel that this was not trying to be another flashy superhero adventure. This felt cold, exhausted, angry, and deeply personal. Frank Castle is no longer hunting random criminals across New York. He is finishing a war that has consumed every remaining piece of his humanity. The entire story revolves around the brutal destruction of the Nucci crime family, the same organization connected to the Central Park massacre that destroyed Frank's life forever. But what makes this setup so fascinating is how the special reframes that tragedy. We learn that the massacre was never simply a mob hit or a drug deal gone wrong. It was orchestrated to silence Frank after he accidentally became a witness to corrupt military operations involving William Rollins and Ray Schoonover. Suddenly, the conspiracy becomes much bigger than revenge. Frank was not just unlucky. He was targeted by powerful men terrified of exposure, and that revelation changes the emotional weight of every single kill we see him commit throughout the presentation. What really surprised me was how broken Frank feels in this story. Usually adaptations of The Punisher focus on his rage, his combat skills, or his terrifying efficiency. But here, the special slows down long enough to show a man barely surviving inside his own mind. The PTSD elements are relentless. Frank walks through empty apartments and crowded streets like a ghost disconnected from reality, and the hallucinations hit especially hard because they never feel exaggerated. They feel intimate. At several moments he sees his daughter speaking to him, not in a horror movie way, but almost like fragments of memory refusing to die. Those scenes completely change the emotional atmosphere because Frank honestly believes his mission is over. He has wiped out almost everyone responsible for the destruction of his family, and for the first time, he is forced to ask himself, what happens after vengeance? There is even a chilling moment where he contemplates ending his own life because he cannot imagine a future beyond violence. That might be one of the darkest things Marvel has ever explored on screen, and the silence surrounding those scenes somehow makes them even more disturbing. Then the special introduces Ma Nucci, and honestly, she steals every scene without needing huge amounts of screen time. The reveal that she survived the purge instantly reignites the entire conflict. Instead of hiding in fear, she responds by placing an enormous bounty on Frank's head, effectively turning New York into a giant hunting ground. From that point forward, the pacing becomes relentless. Every alley, subway station, an abandoned building suddenly feels dangerous because desperate criminals from every corner of the city start chasing the same target. What I loved most is how the special uses this bounty storyline to expand the criminal underworld of the MCU without forcing obvious exposition. We hear whispers about the Hand moving weapons through the city. Tombstone's crew appears during one brutal confrontation. Even Scorpion's name gets dropped in conversations between low-level gangsters terrified of what is coming next. The city starts feeling alive in a completely different way, like all these hidden criminal empires have been operating beneath the surface while the Avengers were busy saving the universe. That grounded street-level perspective gives the presentation a raw energy that separates it from almost every recent Marvel project. One of the smartest creative decisions involves the way Frank interacts with ordinary civilians during all this chaos. Enter Dre and his daughter Charlie, two characters who unexpectedly become the emotional center of the entire story. Dre owns a struggling coffee shop caught in the middle of gang-controlled territory, and Frank initially only enters the place because he needs somewhere to disappear for a few minutes. But the moment Charlie begins talking to him, you can see something inside Frank shift. She reminds him of the life he lost, yet the special never turns their relationship into something sentimental or artificial. Instead, it becomes painfully human. Frank does not suddenly become hopeful or emotionally healed. He simply recognizes innocence standing directly in front of him, and for perhaps the first time in years, protecting someone matters more to him than punishing someone else. That distinction is incredibly important because it signals a major evolution for the character. The Punisher has always existed as a machine fueled by grief, but here the story suggests he might still possess fragments of purpose beyond endless retaliation and bloodshed. The action sequences become even more intense once Frank decides to protect Dre and Charlie because every fight suddenly carries emotional stakes beyond survival. There is one incredible sequence inside the coffee shop after a group of bounty hunters finally tracks Frank down, and the direction feels almost claustrophobic. Coffee machines explode, windows shatter, lights flicker, and Frank moves through the room like a wounded animal cornered by predators. But what makes the scene memorable is not the violence itself. It is the desperation behind it. Frank is no longer fighting because he enjoys hurting criminals. He is fighting because innocent people will die if he fails. That emotional shift changes the way every bullet lands. The special also does something visually brilliant during these confrontations by blending traumatic flashbacks directly into the action. Frank hears his children screaming between gunshots. He briefly sees Karen Page standing in the crowd before she vanishes. For a split second, the battlefield becomes tangled with memory, guilt, and hallucination. Those transitions are genuinely haunting because they show how impossible it is for Frank to separate the present from the trauma constantly replaying inside his head. What fascinated me most throughout the special was the way it treats loneliness as Frank's true enemy. Yes, there are criminals hunting him across the city, but the deeper conflict is internal isolation. Frank exists in a world where connection feels dangerous because everyone he loves eventually dies. That idea becomes especially powerful during quieter scenes with Dre. The coffee shop owner is not a superhero or a hardened vigilante. He is just a father trying to keep his business alive while protecting his daughter from a city collapsing under violence. Watching Frank observe that normal life from a distance is heartbreaking because you can sense how badly he wants to believe ordinary happiness still exists somewhere. There is even a subtle moment where Charlie asks Frank whether he has children, and the silence before he answers says more than any monologue ever could. The special trusts visual storytelling in ways Marvel projects sometimes avoid, and that confidence gives the emotional scenes far more weight. Every exhausted expression, every hallucination, and every sleepless stare into the darkness reinforces the idea that Frank Castle is surviving on pure momentum rather than genuine hope. The connection to Spider-Man Brand New Day becomes increasingly obvious as the story progresses, and honestly, this might be one of the most exciting setups Marvel has created in years. Instead of forcing direct cameos everywhere, the special quietly builds the criminal ecosystem that Peter Parker is about to enter. The gangs operating throughout New York are becoming more aggressive, more organized, and far more desperate after the chaos unleashed by Frank's war against the Nucci family. That means Spider-Man will not simply face one villain in his next film. He may walk directly into a collapsing underworld where every faction is fighting for territory and survival. The possibility of Ma Ganucci returning as a larger threat becomes especially interesting because she represents something Peter rarely encounters: pure vengeance without morality. Frank understands that darkness because he lives inside it every day, while Peter constantly struggles to preserve his optimism. Bringing those two perspectives together could create one of the most emotionally charged dynamics the MCU has explored in a long time, especially now that Peter is isolated from almost everyone who once knew him. The footage teasing Frank and Peter together already feels electric because there is immediate tension in the way they interact. Frank sees the world as something fundamentally broken, while Peter still believes people can be saved. That philosophical clash has always defined their relationship in comics, but this special presentation gives the conflict far deeper emotional context. Frank is exhausted. He has sacrificed everything, lost everyone, and spent years drowning in violence that never truly healed him. Peter, meanwhile, represents the possibility of becoming something better before it is too late. I think that is why the final scenes of the special matter so much. Frank does not suddenly transform into a hero, but he chooses to keep living after protecting Dre and Charlie. That choice alone is massive character development because earlier in the story he genuinely believed death was the only ending left for him. By surviving, he indirectly opens the door for Peter Parker to challenge his worldview in Brand New Day. Their eventual partnership or confrontation now carries emotional groundwork instead of existing purely for fan service or spectacle. Another detail I cannot stop thinking about is the special's use of Karen Page hallucinations because they reveal how fragmented Frank's emotional state has become. Karen represents one of the few people who ever treated him like a human being instead of a weapon, and seeing her appear during moments of stress feels symbolic. Frank's mind keeps reaching toward the last traces of compassion he remembers. Yet every hallucination also reinforces his inability to move forward. He is trapped between memory and violence, constantly reliving old wounds while creating new ones. The direction emphasizes this beautifully through dim lighting, distorted sound design, and long pauses that make conversations feel almost dreamlike. Even when Frank wins fights, the victories feel hollow because the special never romanticizes his brutality. Bodies pile up, criminals die horribly, and the city grows more unstable with every confrontation. That realism gives the violence consequences. By the final act, New York feels exhausted by bloodshed, almost like the entire city is suffering from collective trauma alongside Frank himself. Very few superhero projects commit this hard to psychological storytelling, and that commitment is exactly what makes the presentation feel memorable. The speculation surrounding Sadie Sink potentially playing Jean Grey adds another fascinating layer to the future of this universe, because Marvel seems to be positioning street-level stories and mutant narratives on a collision course. Even though the special never directly references the X-Men, the atmosphere of fear and instability across New York creates the perfect environment for larger societal conflicts to emerge later. If mutants begin appearing publicly during this era of rising gang violence and collapsing trust in institutions, the political tension could become explosive. What I appreciate is that the special presentation avoids distracting setup dialogue while still planting seeds for future stories. Everything grows naturally out of the environment. Criminal organizations are adapting. Vigilantes are becoming more extreme. Ordinary citizens feel abandoned. That world building matters because it finally makes the MCU feel interconnected on the ground level again. For years, many projects focused so heavily on multiverse concepts that everyday consequences disappeared. Here, Every gunfight leaves shattered storefronts behind. Every gang war affects civilians. Every traumatic decision scars the people forced to witness it. That grounded storytelling approach gives the universe texture and emotional credibility again. By the time the climax arrives, the special transforms from a revenge thriller into something far more tragic and strangely hopeful at the same time. Frank ultimately realizes that vengeance alone can never fill the emptiness created by losing his family. The war against the Gnucci Empire gave him direction, but not peace. Saving Dre and Charlie, however, forces him to rediscover a purpose rooted in protection rather than destruction. That does not magically erase his violent nature. Frank remains terrifying until the very end, yet the final moments suggest he may finally understand the difference between punishing evil and preserving innocence. That distinction could completely redefine his role in upcoming MCU stories. Instead of functioning purely as an uncontrollable weapon, Frank might become a brutal guardian operating in morally gray territory while characters like Spider-Man attempt to pull him closer toward humanity. It is a fascinating evolution because the special never betrays who Frank Castle fundamentally is. He does not become softer. He simply becomes aware that his life still affects people beyond the ghosts haunting his memories. That realization gives the ending surprising emotional power without sacrificing the darkness defining the character. What truly makes this special presentation stand out for me is how confident it feels in its identity. It does not chase massive cosmic stakes or endless cameos. It focuses entirely on trauma, violence, grief, and survival within a city rotting from corruption. The result feels raw in a way Marvel projects rarely allow themselves to be anymore. Every creative choice supports that atmosphere, from the grounded action choreography to the hallucination-driven editing style. Even the quieter scenes carry tension because Frank never fully relaxes. He always looks like a man expecting another war to begin at any moment. And honestly, that final image of him walking back into the darkness after protecting Dre and Charlie might be one of the most emotionally complicated endings Marvel has delivered in years. He is still broken, he is still dangerous, but for the first time in a long while, he is walking forward instead of waiting to die. That tiny shift changes everything heading into Spider-Man Brand New Day and whatever future Daredevil stories Marvel has planned next. If this special is any indication, the street-level side of the MCU may finally be entering its most mature and emotionally gripping era yet. And I also think audiences are going to leave this special arguing about whether Frank Castle can ever truly escape the cycle he created around himself. That question hangs over nearly every scene, especially after the city begins treating him like an urban legend instead of a man. Criminals whisper his name in fear. Innocent people avoid eye contact when he walks past them, and even allies seem uncertain whether he deserves saving anymore. That moral ambiguity is exactly why the presentation works so well. It refuses to provide easy answers. Frank protects people, but he also spreads destruction everywhere he goes. He inspires fear while chasing monsters. He survives unimaginable trauma while causing fresh trauma for others. By embracing those contradictions instead of simplifying them, the special turns the Punisher into one of the most layered characters currently operating inside the MCU. And that complexity is going to make every future appearance far more unpredictable for longtime fans following his violent journey.